Hi, my name is Greg Smith, and I wanted to make a video today about my near-death experience when I was 6, in hopes that sharing this will bring some light about what the other side is about, what abilities we all really have but we might have forgotten, and etc. So, plus it's something I love to talk about. So, when I was 6 years old, I experienced a violent event that was really traumatic, and it stopped my heart from beating, it stopped my ability to breathe, and in that process, I noticed I started to lose consciousness, and I looked up and I could see above the corner of my room, I could see a little pin dot of light. And it was a really unique color. But more than a color, it was like somebody had ripped open time and space, and it was like the light had its own dimension. I don't know. It's really a unique, it was really, really unique. And when I noticed that, I got pulled into it. And there was this whooshing sound in my ears. And it, it was like all of me was aware. Um, I don't know. It just, it was like a whoosh, and all of my energy got pulled out of my whole body, and the last place it was in my ear. And then when my body stopped, I snapped and I went out and I went way up into that light. And I went through the light. And I ended up in this total dark space. But it was warm. And it was completely black. And at that age, I was terrified of the dark. I could not stand the dark. I always had to have a light on. And it was odd because I didn't need it. And I actually felt warm. I felt safe. And it was total darkness. But again, that light was way down, and I don't know, it wasn't a space. And this is hard because words can't really describe what it was that I experienced. But it, in my child's mind, our next door neighbor, I grew up in Alaska, and he had a gold mine, he had many gold mines. And so he had these huge construction, like earth moving, uh, uh, huge construction gear, machines, and like dump trucks and such. And he would bring in these huge inner tubes that would go with those big dump trucks. And so he'd let me and my brother play on them. That was what I kind of thought I was going through, because it was black. It was warm because the times that we got to play on those huge inner tubes, the sun was on them, so they were warm. But there was no smell of rubber or anything. It was just kind of like I look back at it as my adult mind, and it was more like a pressure effect. And so, and why I bring that up is because it really felt like I was going through something, like I was going through the center of those huge tires. And it didn't hurt, all pain stopped, and all fear stopped. And as I went through this dark space, I could still see this pinpoint of light, but instead of kind of being like a blue toned starlight with a little bit of green in it, it was more like it changed more to gold. And then it got bigger and bigger, and there was this like force that kept pulling me towards it, and I kept moving towards it even though there's no space. So this is a heart, it doesn't make sense. And then the light got bigger and bigger and bigger, and I just got happier and happier and had feelings that I didn't even know what they were. But looking back on it, it was more like being present, and it was kind of a being connected with self. And that light got bigger, and it became more golden, and then all of a sudden there weren't any words, but it was like instant knowing, and the light started to change, and it wasn't in front of me, but it was just, it's like the light itself started to shape shift into kind of what looks like, now I know, as like those Oscars, the awards. It looked kind of like that, and there was an instant communication with this light, and what was cool was it was right before I was going to start first grade, and there was one of those little Oscar lights that I knew from when time started, and it was a girl in my class. Her name was Wendy, and she said to me through this light, she's like, "Oh, she said my name, and I didn't know because it didn't make sense, but it was like an instant knowing, because there really wasn't words, but an instant knowing of Wendy saying to me, 'Hey, Greg, I'm so good to see you. I'm gonna meet you in Mrs. Sell's class in a month, and I'm gonna have red hair, and I'm gonna have wear it in red pigtails.'" And I saw, all of a sudden I saw this image of her, and all of a sudden I knew, and I could see all these lifetimes I had with her and she had with me, and I could see where we were one at an energetic level, and that didn't make sense to my child mind, but it was a knowing, and I didn't need my mind to know. And so and then all of a sudden there was these like images of me with her, images with me and other people, like a car trip to the Anchorage International Airport where I grew up in Anchorage, Alaska, and meeting the firemen, and like on a field trip, and I didn't know what the heck that was, but it was just like getting these things ahead of time, and they were happy, and there was no fear, there was no anxiety, there was no anger. It was all a kind of love feeling. That's the biggest love. The closest thing I've ever had to that was like when my oldest nephew and my youngest nephew were born. And it's just like, it's just golden light. I don't know how to explain it. But it's like we are that. And so then all of a sudden there was all these, like I knew everybody. Like imagine knowing everybody on earth, and that they know you, and that not only that, but you, like in that moment I knew all of these stories of previous lifetimes that we all had together. And it was like watching the most incredible movies, and it was with everybody. And oh God, it was just really, really amazing. And they knew me, and they were happy to know me, and I was happy to know them. It was more than happy, it was even more than joy. Again, words are pale trying to describe this. But um, then, so again, there's no time, and so then it's like I went into another part of this wonderful light, and I was shown parts of my life that were coming up at like 20, and at different years, and some of the challenges I was going to go through and live through. And that I also knew part of that communication was I just knew I would never be alone. And then there were people, well, not they weren't people, but I'm just going to say there were people because I saw their pictures later. Um, they were family members from like my great grandfather Arthur Hawks. I saw his picture um, later in life when I was in my 30s, but I met him in that image. The light changed and showed me his image, and in the same thing he wore in the photo. And there's just a kind of love that transcends time and space. And I'm sharing this because you have it too. So no matter how you're feeling right now, how good or bad, how sad or mad, or whatever you're feeling, don't worry about it. Because from the other side, add to whatever you're experiencing that you're loved by ancestors you've never even met. Or I don't know, hopefully you have. But um, that's the thing. When we get in these body suits, which that's all this is just a bodysuit. It's like the astronauts wore on the moon. This is an earth suit, and it allows us to have genetic predispositions, strengths, weaknesses, and things like that that allow us to have a temper or temperament. We might have a temper with that. Um, and that's all part of this bodysuit. And Earth is just one big school. And I used to be a teacher, and I'm a therapist. Um, I'm also a professional astrologer, and so I like healing. I like helping people heal, and I like teaching them new things that are going to help them learn old things that might be new things to themselves now. And um, so anyway, I saw my great grandfather, and I saw my great great grandmother Cora, and a bunch of other relatives, and that I'd never met, who died before I was even born, and they're always with us, whispering, if you will, kind of like into our consciousness, because they're they're wanting you to be your best self all the time, because there is no time on the other side, and we're really their version of heaven, and it helps people to understand this better if you kind of picture our lives as being in a play on stage. And this is, you're the main character, you're the protagonist in your life on stage, and you've got a supporting cast. And that supporting cast is your family, it's your friends, it's your teachers, it's even your enemies. Because when we drop this bodysuit, we drop the ego too, and people who were our enemies actually can have some of the most, I don't know, it isn't quantity, but it's like, from our point of view, it would be like quantity and love. We can have the most love because it can be, um, like, in an acting class I took in college, it's like playing the evil villain is actually really fun. And if you listen to most actors, they'll share, oh yeah, playing bad is good, you know. So because this is a time and space, and it's really low vibration, it's really, really slow here, really dense. This is the school that we can have this density. We can have, like an experience of what it's like to be, and, be bad, do bad. And, or to know that we could be bad or do bad, but instead choose to do good, choose to help other people. And that's kind of extremely relevant right now in our society. So going back to the NDE, I got to see a whole bunch of different timelines. I was given a choice whether to not go back and just drop this suit, this bodysuit. But I was shown my black lab beauty, who was coming in just in a year and a half from then. And I was shown a lot of good. And I was shown that I wasn't alone, and that I was gonna be able to surmount any obstacle that came my way. And it also allowed me to connect with a part of myself that isn't changed by time. And then I kind of had this, I don't know, it wasn't a conversation, but it was like I knew, it was like instant knowing, kind of like a download. And all of a sudden I knew, by a real loving part, like of the universe, that might have been kind of a God, like God, but it's a God consciousness. It isn't an old man with a beard, in a robe or whatever. It was a consciousness, and that was more real than an old man with a beard and a robe, and explaining to me what was happening and why. And part of my purpose, multiple purposes, for having this life, and what I was going to do with it. And actually part of it was making this video. You kind of know that you're doing the things you signed up, your soul wanted you to do, when you don't want to do them. What you're afraid of doing is exactly what you need to do. And so it was hard to leave those people, because they weren't people, but it was hard, and it wasn't just light, but it was really hard to leave those consciousness. And and then it's like I made my decision to go back, and then all of a sudden that pull, it was like grace. I was still in grace, and it was pulling me back to my body. And when it was doing that, what I know were my guides. They're my guides now. They were my guides then. They were explaining everything to me, and kind of loving me, and through that process. And they were like, now you're going to forget a lot of this, because there was so much that I don't remember. And I remember they even gave me a hint, like how to hold on to as much of it as I could. And so I did, and then I went back into my body, and that hurt. It was like slam. And the whooshing started again, and that cord, we all have a cord, and it reattached. But for me, it reattached in my ear because it broke here and it reattached here. And my body was freezing cold. And it was so slow, and I remember taking that breath. And I was really confused. And when I came back, and my dad put me in a warm bath, and I came back, and energetically, it's like I had this whole part was exposed. I don't know how to explain that either. And that wasn't, I was back in my body. And it's like, oh, that was another thing. It's like I had this mini life review because I was only 6. So it was super short. But that life review, I want to take a second and talk about it because it's really important what that is. When people talk about karma, and and I've had I even have my moments now where somebody can be a real jerk, and I might be wishing them, like we're human being, we're human. That's the animal part, and the being part is the spiritual part. Is how I conceptualize it. And it's like the animal part in me might really want to get revenge, but or punish somebody, or even wish ill will on them. But what that life, like we all go through a life review when we die. And what that life review showed me is everything is recorded. And it's not recorded judgmentally at all. It's more recorded. Oh, they're laughing. Okay. It's more recorded so that we're evolving. We're having these experiences to know what is it like to be this infinite being of consciousness. And we're really all one. And it's kind of like each one of us is a finger, is kind of how I look at it. And then that's when we're in our body and we have an ego. And we can do wonderful things together. Like we can feed ourselves, we can type, we can play music, we can hold hands and love and do all kinds of wonderful things. We can also do all kinds of nasty, horrible things. And when we're here, though, especially if you're alive today, it can be like we forget that we're on fingers on the same hand. And there's one palm, which I look at as like our soul, because our soul has like all of our lifetime experiences. It's like your brain in your body. And, all your life, all the courses you took through kindergarten, through high school and college, and or any kind of program that you learned from, or any relationships that you've had, that gets stored in your soul, which is our body dies, but the soul keeps going, and this hand is attached to an arm, which is attached to this whole being, which I look at as our spirit. And that's where we're all one. So it's really ridiculous when we get narcissistic and we cut each other off and we forget, oh my God, I need you. There's things I can do with another person when I look at them as a person and connect with them as a person with empathy, compassion, thought to heart. Versus we're living in a pandemic now in the world of narcissism. which is like this finger going, it's all me. You're all there to serve me. And the rest of our fingers are like, no, we're not. We're on the same hand, silly. You're forgetting yourself. You're forgetting what's real. So, sorry, tangent, but we're dealing with that en masse along with the COVID pandemic. And why I bring that up is because karma, because I'm hoping to share some things that might help remember what's important and what's more real than not. And part of that is when you go through that life review, like we all do, and I've been involved with groups of people who've died and came back too, and it's a really common experience. And what it is that, like right now when we're in this body, we experience things, but we perceive it like just from looking out of these eyes, knowing what touch feels like from our hands touching. And if somebody touches us, well, they're touching our skin. But so it's very much from an egoic point of view and experience, because that's the limits of this bodysuit. But when we die and we go through a life review, we experience everything, not only what we remember experiencing, but we get to experience what we did to somebody else. And we know their thoughts, we know their feelings, and we feel their feelings. So I never saw, and I just there is really, in my experience, and you're invited to have your own, it's like there is no hell. And the heaven isn't this place that we go to. It's a consciousness. And it's really just a little bit above us in this dimension. And this consciousness that we have is what's a part of that life review. There is no hell. What we would label as hell, because I got a taste of it when I died, is when we know and experience what other people thought and felt, and then how they changed their lives because of something we did to them. Whether intentional or unintentional, doesn't matter. And it isn't punishment, it's about learning and balance. Karma is really about balance. It isn't like, well, so-and-so punched me, so they get punched back. That might happen, because what I experienced in that life review, because it was super short, was it's like the soul spirit part of us, not the fingers, but the soul and the spirit part of us consciously gets to determine what future life experiences to have to balance that out, and realize it does so with the ultimate in compassion. So this can be really hard to hear or even pay attention to when we've had trauma, and our way of accepting it and making that trauma livable is the idea that so-and-so got such and such comeuppance. We got even. There's a balancing, and there will be a rebalancing. But it isn't like this tit-for-tat punitive stuff. And I have to admit, sometimes with some things I've lived through, that wasn't satisfying to my ego self. And we're here in this dimension, and as long as we're in this bodysuit, we have an ego. An ego doesn't mean like an a-hole. We all got one, and they all stink. You know, there's parts of human beings, and but anyway, I wanted to share this because this is a part of a really common experience when people die and they are able to come back in the same body. There's a lot I don't remember. But you're never alone. And sometimes there's teachings in our world and our life experience that might lend you to think that way, or to think you have to go through another person to connect to God or your God self or consciousness, this God consciousness. You don't. That's made up. That's usually for power, influence, and control. And now more than ever, I think we're all starting to see we need to really start paying attention to who and what we give our power, influence, and control to. Because not everybody uses it wisely, and they don't always think of us first with a loving heart. So I wanted to share that experience. I've got lots of things I want to share. And so, but this is kind of the first one that I want to share. I'd love to hear your experiences, and you can do so in the comments below. If you had some positive experience out of this, please let me know that, and you can do that in the comments or by hitting like, because I want to build kind of a consciousness around this. We've been kind of hijacked into things that aren't really building and reconnecting our relationship to what's important, and instead we've been looking more external to us. And now's the time to start getting grounded, because we're going to be going through some serious changes coming up that are going to be stressful. And if you have the ability to breathe, connect and feel your feet and ground, you'll do much better. And if you know you're never alone, because you're not, it's all good. So, blessings your way, and thank you for watching, and I'll see you soon.